a simple hiatal hernia. And he sent me home and told me to do what they usually recommend, eat frequently over the course of the day and take the pressure off that little hernia. Well, I tried that, but the symptoms kept intensifying. Only now my muscle tone was leaving me, and this really started to bother me when I noticed this happening. It almost seemed like my body was beginning to eat itself out from the inside. And I knew I had a serious problem here at this stage. But an interesting event occurred at this particular time. In fact, throughout my experience, I had a lot of interesting things happen which could all be categorized as a marvelous event of time and chance being very, very good to me. But a friend came along and gave me a pamphlet by Dr. William Kelly explaining the symptoms of cancer. And when we read this, we came to the realization that I may have cancer. But Esther and I felt that we were made in a wonderful way. Our Creator made us in a marvelous way where we have the ability in our bodies to, if we call upon the resources there, to come to our aid and assistance regardless as to the trial the body is subjected to. So Esther and I began to analyze all the information we could get our hands on. We began researching everything imaginable that had to do with cancer. We remember reading one of our first articles in a magazine by Jackie Davison. I think all of you are familiar with her. And in that article, she made reference to Dr. Kelly as well as to, I think, Max Gerson. And, okay, that gave us a direction in which to go in getting a hold of literature. We went down to our local health food store, and we started going through the bookshelves and picking out Max Gerson's book and Dr. Kelly's book and Dr. Walker's book, and we started to digest all this information to learn how it applied to us. And we also came to the realization that there was this other cancer organization out on the West Coast. I don't have the details. I can't seem to recall how we came in contact with that organization on the coast, but we were able to send a sample of my urine out that way and get a reading back, and lo and behold, we really got the shocker that I had a very serious positive reading of cancer. Well, this gave us some idea now as to what we had to do. And so we proceeded from that point to go on a crash program. We went and got ourselves a juicer. We started going on the deletion of all these junk foods, deleted the meats out of my program and so on, just fumbling around in the dark, as it were, just on the strength of reading this information in the books. Another very nice experience happened to me, which proved to be very advantageous down the line. And that was when I was coming back from a business trip. I happened to sit alongside of a friend whose father had just passed away from cancer of the pancreas. And he had gone to New York to have his operation by a surgeon that performs bloodless surgery. And I figured if I ever had to go this route in the future, that I would like to have the name of this particular surgeon, since that is our personal preference, to have that type of surgery without the use of blood. So we contacted this surgeon in New York City, who was a very prominent surgeon, as we learned later on, perhaps one of the finest in his field, is a Japanese surgeon, and told him about my problem, and he invited us right down, and I went through a GI series, and he too sent me home thinking that I too had nothing to worry about. I just had a hiatal hernia. Well, 3 months later, we get another shocker. He gets on the phone and he advises us that the hospital mixed up our x-rays. 3 months later, mind you. And he says these x-rays show that you had a tumor on the liver. Well, we were pretty angry. We were pretty agitated over this, disgusted with the medical community that they could make such a horrible mistake as this. Well, I was not too confident in the report, sent by that hospital, so we went down to the Vermont Regional Cancer Center and had additional x-rays and ultrasound, which confirmed the previous report. All right, now we knew what the problem was, and we had to proceed to do something about it. So at this stage of the game, I was totally convinced from my own understanding of body functions and pains that I had cancer of the pancreas, regardless as to what those doctors were telling me. I kept telling my wife, Esther, I show all the symptoms of cancer of the pancreas. So we felt that precious time had already been lost because of the hospital's belated report. But during that interim, mind you, we had not let up in going through the alternate cancer therapy treatment of my problem, which I felt was a tremendous aid here in giving me some physical stamina and sustenance prior to going into surgery. I might mention that we didn't feel too inclined to go the medical route, to be perfectly frank with you. We were very opinionated in this area. We have always been very health conscious. In fact, as a little boy, I was raised in a Bernard McFadden Foundation School for Underprivileged Kids. So I had some exposure to physical culture as a little fella, and it stuck with me. And my wife was also very much inclined toward approaching life by being sensible in doing things. And we raised 3 sons that are the epitome of health and strength. So we must have done something the right way, is what I'm saying. But somewhere along the way, I degenerated. And as I reflect back on what might have contributed to that, I'm totally convinced that I was caught up at that time in the 60s and the 70s of going ape on the protein intake, the high protein intake. And so my diet consisted of a high intake of meat and your nuts, your cheeses. And I didn't know at the time that I had a very small pancreas. I didn't know this. And so obviously, what led to the deterioration of my pancreas was working that poor little organ to death with my high intake of protein. It just probably couldn't handle it, and it eventually broke down. At least that's the way I analyze it. Some of you medical people out there may think otherwise, but at least that's the way I view it. Well, a decision now had to be made, and it was not easy for us. But again, I wanted to get to the heart of the problem. We saw the definite merits of the alternate cancer therapy treatment. We saw the merits of that, and we weren't in any way going to leave off on following that. But I felt we should tap the resources of the medical world as well as alternate cancer therapy. Tap the resources of what was to be offered and utilize it to my advantage. And so we submitted ourselves to go to the hospital and have an exploratory. And sure enough, the tail of the pancreas was cancerous and it was removed. At the same time, while the surgeon was poking around in there, I guess he discovered a couple of positive lymph nodes as well. So I had other problems that I wasn't even aware of. And in private consultation with my wife, which I knew nothing about until many months later, the surgeon as well as the medical doctor, they both advised my wife that my prognosis was 6 months if I was lucky. But from what Ruth tells me now, it was more like 3 months. Well, maybe ignorance was bliss, but I know this. I've always been a fighter, and I feel it's very important for us, if we have a real serious problem like this, to be a fighter. And I can recall when they removed the bandages on me in the hospital, and for the first time I saw the stitches running down the center of my belly, I got real angry, very angry, because the surgeon sewed me up like a pigskin, thinking that since I wasn't going to be around for any length of time, just sew me up any old way. Because I compared my stitches to other patients who were in the hospital, and I noticed what a neat job others received. So this really irritated me again. And I didn't appreciate it, and it made me all the more determined to let these people know that I'm going to be around with the help of God for a long time. Well, during this stay in the hospital, during this recuperative period, we became acquainted with Ruth Sackman. That was our first introduction to Ruth. And it came about through my wife's sister telling us about Ruth. And so my wife called Ruth, and then Ruth was gracious enough to call me at the hospital. And I really appreciated that phone call. She was very encouraging, and this is what I really needed to really go on this program with all the determination that was necessary and to start treating myself. And of course, we have kept a close relationship ever since. Well, here again, at this stage of my being in the hospital, time and chance proved to be very advantageous and a blessing to me. Because the medical doctor, not the surgeon, mind you, who was taking care of me in the post-operative stages, he learned about my intentions of following the alternative cancer therapy. And so he stuck his neck out, being a medical practitioner, and he advised me to go on to Wobi-Mugus enzymes. I guess that's a German concoction where it's administered rectally, and he would provide me with the Wobi-Mugus so I could get on the program after leaving the hospital and after I had gone through a considerable time of healing. So at that stage in time, you see, I was introduced to enzymes and began working with it immediately following my leave from the hospital. But this same doctor had also learned of a vaccine called BCG. I guess this is a natural vaccine, not to be confused with chemo. And he recommended it because he learned in his research that it triggered the immune system. It stimulated the immune system. And so possibly this would help in a cancer victim's case to get his immune system working against cancer cells. So I consented with going along with the BCG administration. Back home, when we arrived in Vermont, we kept in touch excuse me, with the Vermont Regional Cancer Center, and I insisted on continuing with the BCG treatments for at least 6 months after my operation. And they went along with me on that, although they poo-pooed the idea as being very unimportant and inconsequential. But we felt if there was any hope or any benefit possibly to be derived in stimulating the immune system, we'll try it, since there was no harm to be derived from it. But during my periodic visits to the oncology department at this Vermont Regional Center, believe it or not, I had none other than the heads of staff examining me. Now, the first one of these two heads of staff, who kept in constant examination of me on a monthly basis, when I related to him how I had gone on this program and how it was primarily instrumental in my gaining strength and turning the situation around, he became so incensed he couldn't control himself, and he began uttering terrible profanities, telling me it was a lot of nonsense, a lot of garbage, and that what really cured me was the operation. But he wouldn't accept the fact that this program that I was on was also very instrumental. Well, thank goodness he went his way. He went to Washington or Oregon somewhere, and he probably took up alternative cancer therapy practice there. But this new head of staff who took over, he started examining me to show you how there are such drastic views of opinion among the medical people. When he heard of what I was doing, he was totally absorbed in it. He wanted to hear everything he possibly could about it. And he was very encouraging, very supportive. So we see we have friends out there, whether we realize it or not, in the medical profession. And we should acknowledge them. And where they are cooperative like this, we in turn should let them know that we appreciate it. And in turn, give them information here which they can perhaps incorporate into their medical research as well. And so this gentleman, this doctor, he has been very helpful to me as well. He keeps tabs on my CEA readings, and I'm happy to say that right to the present, these CEA readings have all kept me in a very normal state.